Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you so much for being with us here on the program today, whether you are listening to the radio broadcast on terrestrial radio or the stream at richarddugan.com, or you are listening to the podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music, or you are watching the YouTube video at YouTube and the Tell Me Your Story channel. I am so happy that you have decided to join us for this program. As I say with most every single program, this is going to be an interesting one. It's something that I've thought about, I've often wondered about, and I will pose some very interesting, I hope very interesting questions to our guest, who is joining us all the way from Australia. As we like to stay in the States because we love to mimic Monty Python. Australia, Sydney in particular. And our very special guest who has joined us all the way from Sydney, and her name is Carmel Niland, correct? Say that one more time for me. That's Carmel Niland?
That's correct, yes. Carmel
Excellent.
Niland.
And I'm glad that you have joined us. And I'm going to share with our listeners that we are actually speaking at 11 p.m. Pacific time, so that you are up in, is it morning or afternoon where you are right now?
It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, my gosh. Your Sunday is almost gone.
Yes, it has. And
Good.
It's beautiful spring weather.
Okay, so I know that I will have great weather here when I get to Sunday. Is that right?
I hope so.
I mean, you guys get the previews, and we got to check with you. I still remember in Y2K, a woman came racing into the gas station. I usually would get gas on Friday afternoons. It just so happened that January 1st was Friday afternoon, or December 31st, I should say. And she was freaking out saying, oh, I got to get some gas before the place blows up or this or that or that. I said, you need to calm down. I'm working for a radio station, and we have been monitoring as the time has changed across the international date line. It's okay. Nothing's happening. Calm down. So she calmed down. And like I said, we come to you for the preview of the coming day, and it looks good. We're also coming to you for a preview of what we can look forward to when it comes to not just our physical, mental, and emotional well-being, but even our spiritual well-being. Now, I have thought about this for years, Carmel. And I've often said, okay, when a baby is born, the parents and the relatives look at the baby, and then they look at the relatives, and they, well, my goodness, you have Aunt Jane's eyes, and you have your father's nose, and your sister, your sister's mouth. Or they start attributing physical attributes to the baby that are similar to those of other people. Yeah. Now, as the child grows, their behavior, they start to attribute that to different relatives. Oh, you've got your Aunt Martha's temper, or you've got your Uncle Bill's laugh, or those types of things, right? And then as they grow up and they go to school, we look at the intellect as they begin to become educated. And they go down a particular path. Oh, well, Aunt Frida, she was very interested in blah, 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 and so forth and so on. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Why does it stop there? Why isn't it that maybe we somehow also take on the spiritual characteristics of our ancestors? And that is why you, my dear, have written what I consider to be a very interesting book having to do with our spiritual DNA. And by the way, the website, ladies and gentlemen, is ourspiritualdna.com.au. And I will let you know right now, Carmel, that we will be linked to your website. So let's start usually at the beginning. When did you become aware or become interested in this aspect of nuclear acid on a spiritual level. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly.
Listen, I didn't know what I was becoming interested in, Richard. It's not like I had this plan. I stumbled upon it. I was using a channel, and I was asking a channel about a being I had met in the ether, whose name was Saint Germain. And I wanted to know more about him. And the channel told me that Saint Germain had a female aspect as well. He not only incarnated as females, but he had a female aspect. And that was Mary. And they often link together, as in Saint Joseph and Mary, whom I call Our Lady, right? And I thought this was very interesting. And I thought, well, if that covers two of them, what about everybody else that's in the world? How do they figure? And eventually he went through 12 masters who have a masculine and a feminine end aspects, and literally everyone in the world is one of those 12. They have the spiritual DNA of one of those 12. And from that, we get the remarkable difference between people. We get their physical DNA, and then we get their spiritual DNA overlaying it. Mm-hmm. So the bloke, that's an Australian word for a man, I met first, was a tremendous show-off. He was a dancer. He was a wit. He was a drama queen, if ever you met one. And I thought, this is good. This is good. And I asked him about the lives he had. And they were very interesting. He was a dancer. He was Nureyev. He was a drama queen in the sense that he was the man who wrote Shakespeare. He was a great president. For example, your two last presidents, but one, have been aspects of Saint Germain. So the current one, Joseph, is an aspect of Saint Germain, and Barack Obama was too. Tall, thin, witty, and hopefully great leaders. So why don't I pause there and find out what kind of line you'd like to follow?
Well, first of all, I'm very interested in the 12 aspects, but it sounds to me like the majority of the information that you have regarding spiritual DNA is information that you've researched, you've followed up on a lot of different areas, but it sounds to me like much of this information you received through the ethers, correct? Channeled.
Yes.
Yeah. And so was it primarily through Saint Germain that you gleaned this information, or were there other, shall we call them entities, that came through and shared this information with you?
You name them, I met them. George Washington, for example, is an aspect of an energy line called Hilarion. Robert Louis Stevenson, who's an aspect of El Mariah. I worked particularly with US presidents. So I started with George Washington. Then I went on to John Adams, who was an aspect of Kutumi. And then I went through literally all of the founding fathers. One of the most interesting ones was an aspect of Serapis Bey. He was the great Thomas Jefferson, and he loves the name Thomas. And one of the clues came to me that if you work in English and you find out someone's first name, you've got a pretty good idea as to what energy they're going to represent. So Thomas Jefferson, Serapis Bey, and he got his name because the 12 energies were also 12 apostles. They were 12 knights of the Round Table. They have female aspects as well as male aspects. But Jefferson is the great intellectual, and it doesn't matter what life he comes in, he is an inventor of things. For example, he was Einstein. You name it, he invented it.
Wow.
Why don't we take your name?
All right. Now, do you need first, middle, and last?
Let's have the lot. So Richard first.
All right. It's Richard. Middle name Les, L-E-S. Last name Dugan. And while you're doing that, let me just remind our listeners, this is Tell Me Your Story. We are talking with Carmel Niland, and she has written a book, a fascinating insight into your spiritual DNA here on Tell Me Your Story. This is what we're talking about today. I'm your host, Richard Dugan, and it's great to have our guest Carmel Niland with us to talk about our spiritual DNA. And now I guess I'm going to get schooled here. In a manner of speaking, in a good way, in regards to my spiritual DNA. And I'm curious because I will tell you, well, no, you know what? I'll tell you this later. Go ahead and take the name. Now, first of all, how are you going to be processing my name, the three names that I've given you?
Okay, I'll only be looking at your first name.
Okay.
Okay. Sometimes I go further than that, but the first name will do in your case. And having looked at probably 1,000 different aspects of Saint Germain, I found that he loved certain names. And one of the names he really loves is Richard. So I would have a very good bet in saying that you're an aspect of Saint Germain. But there's further than that. Saint Germain loves going into things in communication. He loves going into things where he can, with his great wit and charm, convince other people of particular lines. So I would say that you would be a typical Saint Germain. Many of the characters, and I also should say he's handsome.
Well, I'm glad. Good for him. You know, I'm getting more and more used to looking in the mirror and saying, yeah, that's you. You know, there was a time when I'm going, who in the heck is that looking back at me? And it seems to me that that would indicate more that I hadn't sort of come into my own and recognized that appearance is just fine. It's working for you. I don't know. Maybe it was because of the beard. I always wanted, when I started growing the beard, I thought, I want to grow it so I have that professorial look. You know, some kind of a scholar. 2009, I became a reverend. And it was rather interesting. And then I was given, not long after that, I was given the nickname Dr. D. So I took that on because I considered myself an audio physician because I do archival work. So, lots of different things. And there was a period of time, Carmel, back in the late 1990s into the 2000s, when I used to be known by a Hindu name of Raja, R-A-J-A, which is Prince. There was a story in the Paramahansa Yogananda book, Autobiography of a Yogi. It was the Tiger Swami story. And the Tiger Swami fought a very ferocious tiger by the name of Raja Begum, which is princess. And it just appealed to me for that at that particular point in life. So it was very, very interesting.
Let's just take this a bit further, Richard, because
sure.
The first chapter of people that I look at from Saint Germain actually comes from India. And that would be Krishna. And Krishna was very interesting because Krishna wasn't one energy, he was a combination of two. So he joined with another being called Hilarion. And why? Because they needed not only Saint Germain's razzmatazz and his ability to sing and dance, which is a charisma aspect, but they also needed the wisdom that came through Hilarion, who was a brilliant conqueror. So for example, he was the first president of the United States, George Washington. But he was also Alexander the Great. So these two combined to make Krishna. And they were assisted by a fellow called Arjuna, who wrote down everything Krishna said. And he also was a dual aspect, one of whom was a female. The aspect that I come from, which is from Mary, is called a high priestess, and she's very good at writing. And it doesn't matter whether you want someone to write a Bible or someone to write a gospel. So she was the line that wrote Luke, St. Luke.
I find this interesting, and I'm curious as to how this plays into the aspect, if you will, of reincarnation. Is there a connection?
Definitely.
Share that with us.
Richard, it doesn't matter which life you take on. Mm-hmm. Predominantly, being a Saint Germain, you will take on male lives, but you have the same spiritual DNA. You only change your physical DNA. That's all. And that's why, if you've studied the histories of many nations, you see people coming through who were very remarkably similar in the kinds of courage they may have had, the wit they may have had, the physical prowess they may have had. And you look at them and you say, look, he's really, the way he goes on, he really is like George Washington. He's taken on something, he's conquered, he's now the head of a nation, but he really doesn't want to be head. He's just interested in offering his almost spiritual aura to the country to take it in a particular stable direction.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that, I have first of all, never been asked to run for any office or any position. And if I were, I would never take it. I would never take that on simply because I wouldn't want that. I don't want that level of responsibility. I would rather serve in the background. I would rather serve humanity in the way that I'm doing this. I would much rather do this than, be over here or over there and then be beholden to this group or that group or the other. It's like, no. You don't understand. This is not about one party over another, one group over another. We're all here together. The good Lord, if the good Lord is, and I've said this so many times, it almost doesn't require repeating, but since you've never heard it before, if the good Lord had intended for each one of us to live on our own planet, I know there are enough Class M planets in the universe for 8 billion people. But what's the reality? The reality is that we're all here, so let's all work together. Stop the tribalism. It's great I love my Irish heritage. I'm beginning to love my Native American heritage, my Italian heritage, my Hispanic heritage. I'm starting to embrace them more. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older. I had my DNA checked, my physical DNA. And I found out that my Native American heritage is from South, Central, and North America. And that I'm 1% Eastern European Jew. I used to say as a kid when I was in school, I'd tell people, I'm Heinz 57. And then when my DNA was done, I found out that was pretty accurate because I'm from 5 of the 7 continents. Australia and Antarctica are not 2 that I'm from. So when you can't send a spiritual saliva test, if you will, to ancestry.com or whatever company you want.
What you can do
What can we do?
is we can look at your names, and we can look at the kinds of qualities you have, what kinds of things you like doing, what jobs you've had. We can build a profile of you, not unlike what a FBI could do. But the thing we would see is that fitted a particular form of spiritual DNA, and that would be repeated lifetime after lifetime. So you will always be a humorist. You will always be a communicator. You'll probably be a very good dancer. You'll probably be good looking. You'll probably be able to talk. As I say often about Saint Germain, he could be talking under a lake with a loaf of bread in his mouth, and the bubbles would be coming up, and you'd still be hearing what he's talking about.
I like that.
You're the kind of fellow who doesn't shut up.
Right.
And the messages he gets across are with great wit and wisdom. So Saint Germain was Plato, right? Saint Germain has written some of the best novels, and he has written some of the most amazingly best plays as well.
Now, before we go any further, you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. We're talking with Carmel Niland, all the way from Australia, and we're talking about her latest work, which is Your Spiritual DNA, yourspiritualdna.com.au. We will be linked to that website as well. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. This is Tell Me Your Story, and I want to ask you, Carmel Niland, our guest here on the program, in regards to Saint Germain, because he seems to be a main focus on this program in any event. Are you talking about how the essence of Saint Germain has become these different people, taken on these different bodies, i.e. reincarnated into those bodies? Or is it that, like Shakespeare or some of the other people you've mentioned who take on the aspects of Saint Germain, it's just in the DNA, it's passed on from generation to generation?
No, it works like this.
Okay.
At the time when the parents are contemplating having a child, or not contemplating having a child, it's a surprise. A kind of a conference is held, and that conference has a person who's going to be the guide of the child, and the qualities and the stamina that the child is going to have. And a selection is made as to who will inhabit the physical DNA that's coming in. Sometimes it goes horribly wrong. Sometimes it's a bad match. And occasionally, this happens very occasionally, that a person will go into hospital with a major illness and come out with what seems like a personality changed because there's been a switch. But very, very rarely does that happen.
Now are you talking about walk-ins?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I remember a conversation I had with a guest that, oh no, that does not happen because you can't just give up and leave the body. But at the same time, maybe the contract that they signed, as this is sort of the conversation we've had, you sign a contract to have certain experiences. Well, maybe that person completed the contract or renegotiated the contract or what have you and said, I want out.
Yes, I think it happens fairly rarely because I think the planning is too good for that.
Okay. But you say it happens on occasion.
Happen on occasions, yes.
Okay.
And it happened, when I was talking to you about Krishna, for example, that Krishna, it's all very well to play a pipe and dance a lot and be absolutely gorgeous and have everybody falling in love with you. Mm-hmm. But honestly, you could conquer a place as well. So it might make sense to bring in Hilarion, who's a fantastic military person. And we're talking mainly about men here. Exactly the same thing happens in female energies as well. And they're all fit for purpose. Have you ever looked at the founding fathers and the founding mothers of your nation and seen how clearly they were fit for the purpose they had to do? Mm-hmm. A great variety of people. And their spouses were just as interesting.
Yeah. I heard something very interesting just the other day that I had already figured. I kind of agreed with it when they were stating this. But they were talking about Judas Iscariot and how, do you know, this is the way the conversation went, the two people were talking, did you know that if Judas Iscariot had not turned Jesus over to the authorities, he never would have been crucified? And the Christians would not have salvation as we know it today? Mm-hmm. So he had a role. He had to play that role. He had to betray Jesus. And I thought, well, gee, wait a minute. Now, so what you're saying is that there's a certain level of predestination here. Or Judas was set up to quote unquote fail, or maybe putting it in a less judgmental perspective, he carried out the role that he came here to fulfill.
I've written a book on it. I've written a book on Judas.
Talk to us about Judas.
So it's called Loving Judah or Judas. And it's dictated by Jesus, who was his best friend. And what they did, these two, is they were both absolutely fed up. Judas was a man of exceptional intelligence. Jesus is everything that you already know about him. Mm-hmm. And the apostles were driving them mad. Jesus actually wanted to settle down and have a family because he'd met the love of his life, Mary the Magdalene. Judas was his best mate, and he just wanted to help him. So they concocted together a kind of a plan where Judas would give Jesus away, and Jesus would probably be put in jail for 48 hours by the Romans, and that'd be the end of it. Then Judas would get him out. But the plan got absolutely stuffed up, and the next thing you know, I'm making this superficial, but the next thing you know, he was on the cross, and Judah, who had been begging mercy for him of any of the contacts he had, was not successful. And because he had technically agreed to betray him, he suffered then for 2,000 years this terrible stigma of going from best friend to the betrayer of the best friend.
Yeah.
In past life, Judas was none other than Julius Caesar. This is a very intelligent, one of the great conquerors of the world, and great wit as well. And I have to add an aspect of Saint Germain. So there you go.
Carmel Niland is my guest, and we are talking about not only your spiritual DNA, we're also talking about a lot of other wonderful aspects of this study and research, and I'm excited that she's on our program today. This is Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, and we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and 9 a.m. on Wednesdays for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story, where you can basically listen live at those times at richarddugan.com. We have a link that takes you to this live stream at those times. We're on podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry. We're on Amazon Music. We're on iHeartRadio. And you can watch these videos on YouTube. The Tell Me Your Story channel, Richard Dugan, is who you're looking for. There is another channel called Tell Me Your Story, but that's not me. So look for the guy with the hat and the beard, okay? Unless this other person decides to grow a beard and wear a hat, I don't think he will. But nonetheless, I hope that you will subscribe. And I have to tell you, folks, we have finally hit a major milestone in our podcast listening. Been podcasting and posting on SoundCloud since January 1, 2018. We just hit 50,000 listens. 50,000! Now, that's since then, it's a lot of listens. So thank you for listening and sharing Tell Me Your Story with others. And we're hoping that our video casts will be as successful. We're talking with Carmel Niland, all the way from Australia. We're talking, of course, about her work on DNA, specifically your spiritual DNA. I need to ask you in reference to this aspect that we've just been talking about in regards to Judas, but I want to carry this another step further. Mm-hmm. There's a story in the Bible that talks about one of the archangels by the name of Lucifer, son of the morning.
Yes.
All right. Now, I've been watching a program, I think it's on Netflix. It's called Lucifer. Mm-hmm. And it takes place in our modern day. And here is the devil, Lucifer, taking on physical form. He doesn't have horns, and a pitchfork. He looks just like you and me. And as the program progresses, I start thinking almost the same things of Lucifer, who was an archangel, or is, as I think of Judas. That if it hadn't, if Lucifer had not said, I want to exercise free will, I want to do my own thing, I want to go over here and do this, and God apparently casts him out and says, nah, you're not going to do that. And I tend to sort of agree with this program that he was set up, and it's like, wait a minute, this a lot of these stories start, as time goes on, they seem like they start to fall apart.
Well, let's take it from a different point of view.
Please.
In the Gospels, Lucifer spent 40 days and 40 nights with Yeshua ben Joseph, whom we know as Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And Jesus didn't get a lot to eat or drink during this time and he confronted the negative aspects of himself as he debated with him. And this was extremely tempestuous experience for him. But in the end of the 40 days and the 40 nights, Lucifer bowed to Jesus and said, thank you. And Jesus said, I love you. And then he was pretty much prepared to go out and select his own apostles and start his own training. Now, why would God the Father have given, and God the Mother, given Jesus that particular experience? Why would they have battled for 40 days and 40 nights? So I believe that Lucifer had a lot to teach him.
Well, one of the other aspects of it, too, is that we tend to, as human beings, anthropomorphize these spiritual aspects that we're taught. Most people, you see the pictures especially of God the Father. We don't know what God the Father looks like, but there have been pictures of this man with a white beard, and maybe a staff that he carries around, and people think that it's a literal person, and I find that that's really really very interesting.
Well, I think we're challenging it now, but
Yeah.
let's go back to Michelangelo.
Yes, please.
Michelangelo was a very interesting being. He's the only being in our memory, for example, something like 5,000 years, who was a human and an angel at the same time. So Michael, the archangel, and El Mariah, who is the key energy, the same energy as Peter, combined to create this person. And why? Because it was such a mammoth job that they needed the help of an angel to actually paint the Sistine Chapel. It's a phenomenal, it's a phenomenal experience if you've ever seen it. So I think archangels are used in a variety of ways. We've talked about two aspects of them. And when Michelangelo captured his idea of who God was, he captured him as a male. It doesn't mean that God's a male.
Mm-hmm.
It's a he, she.
Yeah.
It's both energies combined.
It's very interesting to have conversations about these things, and I will say at this particular juncture, as I do quite often, that I am not saying I'm right. I am just saying that these are my musings, just as the author Kazantzakis, who wrote The Last Temptation of Christ, for which the movie was made, if anybody was ever to pick up a copy of his book, which none of the Christians that I was associated with in the 80s and early 90s would ever want to do, because I'm not going to pick up that blasphemous book. If you had read the premise, Kazantzakis, I paraphrase, basically said, these are just my musings. I am just, what if Jesus didn't die on the cross? And I know that's Italian and he was Russian, but anyway, but it's like, that's it. We're just asking questions. We're just considering possibilities. I'm not saying any of this is true or false. I'm just saying my brain, the answers I was given to the questions that I would ask of Christians when I was working for a Christian station back in the 80s and 90s, the answers didn't make any sense to me. They made no logical sense. And I kept thinking about that Old Testament passage that says, let us sit and reason together. Well, how do you do that? You use your brain, that which God gave you, to reason. I find that I just find it fascinating that people are not willing to do that, especially today. They will be given some information, and for some reason, they just automatically believe that it's true. Oh, I never have. It's not to say that I'm a cynic, but I'm curious.
Can I just put it this way? If you've got to communicate with a 3-year-old, you talk 3-year-old language. Mm-hmm. If you're going to communicate with a group of people wandering in deserts who all have different opinions of it, who are highly uneducated, what kind of stories do you tell them? You tell them stories of awe and wonder.
Yeah.
Create beings who are bigger and bigger than life. Now, that's not to say that Moses wasn't a bigger than life creature. He was an aspect of Hilarion, by the way, the founding energy of your nation. But he was strong, but the communicator was Saint Germain. He was his brother.
Yeah.
And together you get a better picture of things. Yeah. Now, if the same thing had happened tomorrow, what kind of people would be creating the stories? The people who would be creating the stories, and I don't mean this from an arrogant sense, But they'd be people like you and me,
Yeah.
educated, articulate, experienced in the world, on a radio program.
Yeah. You know, one of the most fascinating interviews I've ever had, and I've had a number of them, have been with rabbis. And one of the rabbis that I conversed with told me, especially and you used the phrase that he used to describe, quote unquote, the devil or Satan. He says that if you really read into the Old Testament and the Torah, there is no literal physical Satan or devil. He said that in the Jewish tradition, that is the lowest base nature of man. Just as you spoke of with Jesus dealing with his lower base nature with Lucifer questioning him and challenging him and all of this. And that just makes more sense to me than this other creature on the outside, because what happens, and this is what I found to happen over and over again, was that if good things happened to Christians, oh, praise God, God did all of this. If bad things happened to them, it was the devil's fault, which meant that they didn't have to take any responsibility whatsoever. It's kind of like Flip Wilson, going back to the 70s and 80s, used to say, the devil made me do it.
That's right.
But where is your responsibility? And this is the old phrase that always came up, that I always came up with. You're either responsible or you're not. You're either pregnant or you're not. Okay? You can't be a little pregnant. You can't be a little responsible.
That's right.
And so that's kind of where I was coming from. This is Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I am here with Carmel Niland, all the way from Sydney, Australia, and we are talking about her work and her book, Your Spiritual DNA, and yourspiritualdna.com.au is the website. We will be linked to that website so that you, the listeners and the viewers, can find out more about the work that she is doing, and I hope that you will do that. As we continue here on Tell Me Your Story, I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we are talking about, these are the kinds of conversations that I love. But I want to get to some of the other works that now you've already mentioned you've got two books that you've talked about thus far. One is, of course, Your Spiritual DNA. The other, of course, you wrote about Judas, okay? What are some of the other studies and or research that you have done that may be in book form these days that people can find out about through your website that you want people to know about that have been of interest and have intrigued you?
Well, I was intrigued with who everybody was and how they were connected. And I was, and like you, I've got an Irish Catholic name, Carmel Niland, and prior to that. So I was brought up literally in a convent. And I needed to know all of the answers to the questions I had. And I found the nuns rather limited in some of the ways that they expressed that. So as I went on my journey, I kept seeking a person who could be that pure and that educated and that humble that they could channel Jesus himself. Because I wanted to talk to the boss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
So I wanted to talk to him, but he wanted to talk to me, because one of the jobs I've had lifetime after lifetime after lifetime is writing the stories of the great ones. For example, Luke writing one of the Gospels. So I had a chance to do that, and he said, well, I'm here to serve you, but I want you to do something for me. As one of our official biographers, I want you to rewrite the book of Joseph.
Oh.
Now, because this is not Saint Joseph, this is Joseph of the multicoloured coat. He said, I didn't wear a coat. He said, I wore a cloak. That coat hadn't been invented yet. And that's literally how it began. He wanted to tell me his story, and he wanted to particularly tell me the story about his relationship with the Pharaoh. And that'll knock your socks off, because he was a slave. The Pharaoh was the richest and the most beautiful person around. And the Pharaoh fell in love with Joseph. So because a homosexual relationship couldn't be described in the Bible, because the people wouldn't accept it, that bit was eliminated. And this bit he wants to, and why does he want this bit out? He wants it out so that the technical details as to how to find his grave will provide the truth of what he has said.
You know, there are a couple of books that I have in my possession. One of them I purchased some years ago. I lost the original copy of it, and it was in that real thin onion paper like a lot of Bibles are made of. And the book was written by a gentleman, a Catholic priest, who channeled this information. His name was Johannes Graeber, Communication with the Spirit World of God. And the channel was really hard on the Catholic Church. He had a real hard time with that. I remember giving the book to my mother, and at the time she was still very much a Catholic, practicing Catholic, and did not care much for the book at the time. I also had another book that was sent to me, a little oversized book, and the author also channeled Paul, the Apostle, and basically, the book that he channeled, that was channeled through him, was an explanation of the epistles that he had originally written, or that were attributed to him. Now, I personally say that if the people of that day had gotten it with the Gospels and the Book of Acts, they wouldn't need any more letters. They wouldn't need any more explanation, because that's all the letters are. They're explanations, because people are complaining, well, these people over here doing this, and these people over here doing this, and I don't understand. You said da-da-da-da-da. And so he had that book. And it was so fascinating to talk with these people, to talk with this gentleman who had channeled Paul of Arimathea, Paul the Apostle, and of course his whole business of his experience on the road to Damascus and so forth. And again, it's like you were just...
Paul is a reincarnation of Moses.
Oh, really?
So he has a long history of dealing with God. And he, as Paul, was there to translate Jesus' commentary, which was in a different language and of a different culture, and make it available to the Gentile culture. And I have to say that he's an aspect of Hilarion, and I think it's one of the tougher aspects of Hilarion that ever lived, because he was so much disliking of women. He was so sexist. He turned me off completely.
Oh.
And one day I was fortunate enough to talk to him in the channeling. And I said, well, I didn't think much of you. I felt you were a sexist pig. And he was very confronted. He said, is that why you came to work for me, is it? And I said, I was a man of my time. And other people can perhaps translate the things that I said. My heart was in the right place.
Yeah.
But my culture was such, and what was needed was a different way of taking the world into the modern world. which happened, around the year 0, the time before that being BC and the time after it being AD. Mm-hmm. And he was to help the leap through to the AD. And he was tough, and he ended up crucified too. He didn't have an easy life.
Yeah. Carmel Niland is my guest. The latest work that she has that we have been promoting here is Your Spiritual DNA. I'm Richard Dugan. This is Tell Me Your Story. We provide you with we provide you with choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Some programs have a little bit more information in that regard than others, but in general, what we're trying to do is spark conversation. We're not saying we have all of the answers or even the right answers. We just have answers that work for us today. They serve us, and tomorrow we may come up with some new ones, only because we're in the process of evolving. We're growing. We're changing. Isn't that why we go to formal education? You don't start out in first grade to doing nuclear physics. You got to work your way up to that if that's what you want to do. And that's kind of where we are with, say, physics and quantum physics and spirituality, maybe quantum spirituality. I don't know. My guest is Carmel Niland, and I find all of this just so intriguing. One of the things that I want to talk about, because I want to shift gears just a little bit, I want to talk about the women. Mary Magdalene, this fascinating woman who has been written about, and one of my guests on this program has written a book specifically geared from her, if you will. I Remember Union is the title of the book that she wrote. And one of the things that I've often been curious about, and maybe you can shed a little more light on this, the first pope, if there hadn't been the patriarchy in those days, should have been Mary Magdalene, because she was the first person to recognize who Jesus was following his resurrection. And I say this humorously, she wanted to reach out and touch his cloak. He said, no. And I say, the reason he said that is because the paint wasn't dry yet. But be that as it may, when the men came along, basically, hey, buddy, can you tell us where the nearest saloon is? We need to drown our sorrows. Our buddy just died. They didn't know who he was. Not a clue. And yet one of them got to lead what became the universal church. And yet women over the centuries have played significant roles in the spiritual growth of humanity. I'm going to do it in that broad sense, the spiritual growth of humanity.
Well, let me say a few things about Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene and Yeshua ben Joseph had a passionate relationship. He regarded her as his equal. So think about that. They had 3 children together. He left her twice to go back to Tibet. He walked. He didn't fly. He walked twice. Came back. They had their kids. Now, her purpose was to speak directly to women through her living in France and leave her position on the world. She was a highly enlightened woman. Let me give you some aspects of Mary Magdalene who you've been around. You've recently had a woman on the High Court called Ruth Bader. Yes, Ruth
Bader Ginsburg, yes.
Recently died.
Yes.
Little woman. Now that is a direct, she was Mary the Magdalene. Now, let's look at her in another form. She was also Jane Austen, the writer of Pride and Prejudice, right? She has taken lives, at least a couple every century, of women who have been classic fighters for the rights. My favourite Mary Magdalene life was as Golda Meir, the head of Israel. Now, she had balls, and there's no doubt about it. You would say that of almost every Mary Magdalene lives. But other times she comes in as an exquisite beauty, the kind of, knock your socks off kind of beauty. Mm-hmm. And not only is she beautiful, she's intelligent as well. And then other times she comes in almost as one of the ugliest women you've ever seen, and takes Israel by the throat, gives it a good shake, and puts all the pieces back together again. So when the book that I'm currently writing, which is on Mary Magdalene, comes out, I hope that will give a far more nuanced and accurate picture of this woman whom Jesus himself chose to be his wife. So I think that's about says it all.
And I realize that there are going to be people listening to this this interview, this conversation that you and I are having, and they're going to have a real problem with it. And I understand that. I can appreciate that. Okay?
So, given your Irish background, I presume you were brought up a Catholic like me.
Oh, yes. Irish Catholic. I was brought up in the Western Rite. I was also exposed to the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church, the Byzantine Rite, in my first marriage, which was a wonderful experience. And I appreciated the honesty of the priests. One in particular, Father Nanko. He was actually the Monsignor of the Phoenix Church in North Phoenix. At the time, it was North Phoenix. I don't know where North Phoenix is now. In any event, and he came over to our house in the spring. They usually do the house blessing, right? And I asked him a very serious question. I says, why is it, in your opinion, why is it that of all of the crucifixes, none of them show Jesus naked, and yet the history shows that the final indignation, the final shame, if you will, was that they were stripped naked of whatever loincloth they had. And he was very honest about it. He says, well, because we don't want to upset the sensibilities of the people. And what came flying into my mind at that moment was, well, wait a minute, I thought you were supposed to know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Unless, of course, it upsets the sensibilities of the people, But I was grateful for his forthrightness, his honesty in that regard. I wish more people, more people within these hierarchical institutions could be that way. But it's hard to do because you start bucking against the system, and you could get thrown out of the system, and you're now on your own.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I loved a couple of the stories that Yeshua has told me about his crucifixion. The one I liked the best was when he finally comes back to life. He doesn't come back in the kind of way that has been shown in our pictures. It takes a lot longer than 3 days.
Right.
When he comes back, he's unable to walk because his feet have been nailed to a cross.
And I heard his legs were broken. I don't know that that's in the book, in the Bible, but I'd heard something along those lines.
Yes. He was a cripple when he came back to life. And his mum's there. And his mum says, that's Mary, the mother, not Mary the Magdalene.
Right.
Says, well, we've got to get you around here somewhere. So she goes into Joseph of Arimathea's place, whose tomb he was using. And she says, she puts him in a wheelbarrow and wheels him out. And I said, well, this is rather different from the kind of glorious resurrection that I've heard about. And he said, listen, I couldn't work. I had every bone in my body every bone in my feet was broken. Mm-hmm. I could not walk. And I thought, thank God that the women were there to sort him out. and to get him off there because he was still concerned that the guards would come and find him. Yeah. So I think there are alternative ways of describing some of the things we heard in the Gospels. And when you hear them, they make sense.
Yeah. One of the other aspects that I'll just touch upon real quickly here is, according to the Gospels, the reason why Mary and Joseph were going to Bethlehem in the first place was to participate in the census.
Right.
Now, here in America, we just completed that process last year, 2020.
Yeah.
Successful or otherwise, right or wrong, we supposedly completed that. But that was the reason that they were going. However, I don't read any place in the Gospels that speaks to the fact that they were in Bethlehem and that they were counted, that their names were written down in the rolls, i.e. that there would be evidence at the time of Jesus' birth that he actually existed. I did some research, and I wanted to know if there was any historical evidence of his existence outside of the scriptures. And supposedly there's only one place where he's mentioned by some other saint, a gentleman who was a saint. And that was about it. Whereas if they had the census papers or parchments,
yes,
then Joseph and Mary would have been there along with their son, Jesus.
And their other children.
Yeah, and I believe, wasn't James also a son, a brother?
Yes. James was the eldest and there was altogether about 6 children, and he was about the 4th.
Wow. That I did not know.
And
I know what that's like. I grew up in a family of 6 myself.
I grew up in a family of 7.
Oh, my goodness.
What do you expect of Irish Catholics?
Well, exactly right. Be fruitful and multiply, and boy, did we.
One of the things that caused me the biggest joke he cracked with me, he said, what I don't like about the Gospels, and it's quite a few things he doesn't like about them, he said, my mother was made a virgin. She had 6 kids. She became a virgin. She said the rewriting of the story, which happens around the time of Constantine in about the 3rd century, was something that annoyed him greatly, because he had been the messy bits of his life, like how do you walk away from a grave when you can't walk?
Yeah.
These kind of bits have been airbrushed out. Other children have been airbrushed out. His mother has been made a virgin, and she was not a virgin. She was quite a prolific woman. And they're the kinds of things that we, who've been educated, have visited Jerusalem, have done great study, ask ourselves this and just say, why are we expected to believe some of these things?
Yeah. And I am always I am always in awe, and so in a good way. Being born and raised Catholic, I love the ritual, the traditions, and the ceremony.
So do I.
Even in the Byzantine Rite, in spite of the fact that when the cantor when the priest or the altar boy would walk down the aisle with the little container of incense, and he'd be waving it around in the church there, and it was strong. In the Catholic Church, in the Byzantine Rite, it was really strong. And this was a small church, and they didn't have air conditioning in there, and there was one February when it was very warm, almost passed out. Never experienced passing out, but I really wanted to because it was warm, and then you had the incense, and oh my goodness. But I've always had a very I will just say it, a very warm spot in my heart for the church as I experienced it, both as a child as well as in my 20s and early 30s with my first wife, the Byzantine Rite. And I never left the church. I just stopped practicing because I got it right and I could move on. But I was curious about other things. But I never turned my back. And my mother did something really astounding to me and maybe for me that I've asked her about since. I was 16, 17 years old. I was delivering newspapers on a Sunday morning, and I'd come home and I'd go back to bed. And the last thing I wanted to do, getting back to bed around 6 or 7 in the morning, was get up at 9:30 to get ready to go to church at 10. And so one morning I says, I really don't want to go. And she says, okay, that's fine. And I didn't have to go. So years later, I asked her, why did you do that? She says, because I didn't want you to push away or pull away from the church, which I never did. And so I have a great deal of respect for my mother and the wisdom that she showed towards me. And that's one of the reasons why, I became a Baha'i for a year and a half in the 90s. I have followed a lot of the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda.
Yes, so have I.
I have been very curious about the Muslim faith and what Muhammad teaches. That's another thing. A lot of people, they don't know what the Quran says. There's a passage in the Quran that says, to his own people, he says, protect the people of the book.
Yes.
And at that time, the only people of the book there were, for the most part, were the Jews who had the Torah, which were scrolls, but they were still books, and the Christians, who had copies here and there scattered because they were only being handwritten by the scribes. And I thought, he's telling his own followers, protect the people of the book. And here we are today, and that protection is all but lost. And that's just one aspect. But and Mary is referenced in the Quran. So it's very interesting how these different, I like to call them philosophies, Carmel, are intertwined. They're inseparable, and no philosophy springs up out of a vacuum. It always comes from another source, another a beginning, if you will.
Yes.
We're talking with Carmel Niland all the way from Australia. I'm Richard Dugan. This is Tell Me Your Story. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Folks, it is late where I am, but that's okay. I am having a great time talking with Carmel Niland from Australia, Sydney, Australia, to be exact. What I find so fascinating when I look at a map of Australia, which is about the size of the United States, the contiguous United States, I don't see a lot of green in the middle, which is really unfortunate. But...
Yes.
But that's okay. I would guess that it's still a beautiful country to you, especially along the coastlines.
Around the coastlines, yes. In the mountains, yes. You can come across very verdant parts of Australia, but it's a dry country. And it was continuously inhabited by Aboriginal people for 40,000 years.
Yeah.
And they have memories of it being a very verdant place, but for a variety of reasons, which had nothing to do with the mistreatment of the land, it dried up. And we've got wonderful stories from them about it too.
That is something else that we here in the States, we don't take advantage of. And, of course, there is that level of animosity towards non-Indigenous peoples, even though I suppose I could say, I'm Indigenous because I was born and raised in the United States. But I'm referring to those ancient tribes, if you will, that have existed here in Central and South America that we could learn so much from.
Exactly. Yes.
Some people, they wonder, when's it going to rain? When's it going to rain? Well, guess what? The indigenous peoples know exactly when it's going to rain because they can read the sky. They know the signs. They can teach us the signs as well. And I was blessed by one Chumash Indian here on the Central Coast who told me that I was a member of, along with many other people who live here, I am a member of the new Chumash Indians. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And of course, now that I know that I have that Native American blood in me, I feel much better about being interested in looking into the Native American medicine and rituals and just all that reconnects us with Mother Earth and with nature.
Can I just put this in a different way?
Yes, please.
I believe that what he was saying to you was a compliment, but he put it together in a particular way. What he was saying to you is, I am meeting a reincarnation of a Chumash Indian. That's you, Richard.
Oh.
That's
wow.
what he was saying. So the things that you're interested in now are the reverberations and the energies that are coming from the past life experiences that you've had.
Well,
and you're accepting of them.
And I am truly, and I'm being exposed as I move forward. And the thing that I love about this process that I am going through and many others as I begin the process of, I'll call it, waking up, becoming more aware, raising my consciousness, if you will, is that as I do that, and I can sense and I'm aware of the changes that I'm going through, both physically, but mentally, as well as emotionally and spiritually, that the people around me, they take on a different, I will say, hue. They will take on a different sort of persona. And some of them will drift away, and some of them will come closer. Mm-hmm. And I like that. I like that, the thought of that. But even more so, I like the thought of that process of growth, of evolution within myself.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We got a bit off the topic, but that's good because it was really interesting hearing what you had to say. And we've covered a lot of ground. I love to remain in contact, particularly when future books come out.
Absolutely. Please, let's do that. I will be sending you information about our video casts, our podcasts, as well as the radio broadcasts, and you'll be able to tap into those as well. I want to ask you 3 final questions before I let you go that I ask all of my guests.
Yes.
And you may have answered them during the program, but I'm going to ask them anyway because I like to ask them directly. But first, I want to remind our listeners and viewers that these programs are heard Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific Time, 1 a.m. Monday morning, and 9 a.m. on Wednesdays. It's a special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We have podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, many other locations that you folks are even reposting our podcasts to, and I thank you for doing that. And I hope you'll subscribe to the podcasts. We're also on YouTube where you can watch these interviews. I hope that you'll do that. And thank you so much for bringing our numbers up to 50,000 listens on SoundCloud and through all of the outlets, the other platforms that are connected. We also hope that if you can and you can support our work financially, we would greatly appreciate it. That's why we have a PayPal account. It's for your security as well as ours. And any amount is gratefully appreciated and accepted. And all you have to do when you go to PayPal and you want to send us a contribution, they'll ask for an email address. Richard@richarddugan.com. Richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. And also participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s. We're asking you to spend time going within, being still, and that quiet, calm, peaceful space of your closet, if you will, your inner life, and listen to that still small voice. As I've said before, your still small voice will never put you in harm's way. It will challenge you. I've been challenged and always come out the other side feeling pretty darn good that I listened and followed the promptings. So please take the time to do that. And with that, we now go to the final three questions of our program here on Tell Me Your Story. I feel like I'm doing a game show now. The final three questions are, number one, who is Carmel Niland?
Carmel Niland is the eldest of 7 children. Carmel Niland has been brought up an Irish Catholic. Carmel Niland is married to John Niland, who has been active in education, including being vice chancellors. The equivalent in America is president of bodies. I was fortunate enough to come to the United States to be educated at the University of Illinois, so I'm an alumni of that. And I taught school in upstate New York in Ithaca. My son, Adam, my first son, is an American citizen, and we're very pleased with that. He wanted to stay a while, and he thought he could add to this. add to this. I have run government departments. I have written books, and I am now retired and doing the kinds of things I really want to do, which is trying to express a different viewpoint of the world that's come from the education I've had, spiritual education, and my scholarly education as well.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you are doing now?
What I hope to achieve is that people open their minds to different perspectives. We were created as perfect beings, regardless of our colour, regardless of our language, regardless of our gender. We were created as perfect beings. And by exploring both our physical DNA and our spiritual DNA, we come to the concept that we are recreating the concept of what it is to be a human.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
Okay, now that's a very interesting question. I told you how I was a reincarnation of St. Luke. And my life's purpose is to retell stories that have been previously written and give them new layers to them, give them different perspectives, turn some of them on their head, but kind of reinterpret some of the truths, the ancient truths that we've been taught or that we've explored ourselves. So somebody had to have a job of contributing to some of the great books. And I have been privileged through my many lives to have sat at the feet of great people and been able to tell their story.
Well, I thank you for sharing your story and the work that you are doing, especially through your spiritual DNA, the latest work of you, Carmel Niland. And I thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we're giving you choices. And knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love, Talal.